Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, Celebrating and Supporting Our Refugee Neighbors. Today, we are formally launching the Refugee Advocacy Lab, including our new website, refugeeadvocacylab.org. We are excited to launch during Welcoming America's Welcoming Week, a time to build connections among refugees, immigrants, and longtime residents, and affirm the importance of an inclusive America. Thank you to our event co-hosts, Refugee Congress, IRC, IRAP, and World Education Services, and to our fantastic panelists. It took a village and more than a year to get here. I'm going to warn you up front that 90% of my remarks are thank yous, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Because we created the Refugee Advocacy Lab as a public good for our community. Our mission is to grow the diverse constituency for US leadership on refugee protection, at home and around the world. We believe that many more people and groups can be mobilized to bring us closer to the vision of America as a place of refuge and a champion for people forced to flee their homes. We know that sustainable progress will be made when people who are and people who were refugees are supported in telling their stories and leading the charge. The Refugee Advocacy Lab is an initiative hosted at Refugees International, co-founded with the International Rescue Committee and the International Refugee Assistance Project. The lab is powered by dozens of partners and people who are passionate about this work. We exist to fill gaps that were collectively identified and to build shared value in three interconnected areas. First, we develop and help implement strategic communications insights. Our first campaign lifts up the voices of refugees working alongside longtime residents to give back to their communities during COVID and beyond. My heartfelt thanks to Goodwin Simon Strategic Research, the Open Society Policy Center, Refugee Congress, We Are All America, USA for UNHCR, New American Economy, and Refugee Council USA for our collaboration. And Lubab, who you will hear from soon, was the very first storyteller we worked with. Lubab, it's so special to me that you're here today, and your story and your service inspire me. Second, we support inclusive national and state policies. Today, we'll be talking about a set of those policies focused on how we can enable refugees and other internationally trained professionals to practice at their full potential. Right now, we are working in 5 states, Virginia, Michigan, Georgia, Utah, and Colorado, and hope to expand in the coming year. And my gratitude to our many partners in our state work, including Church World Service, IRC, the Center for Victims of Torture, and HIAS. Third, we build partnerships within our community and with groups that have not previously focused on refugee issues. This includes working to mobilize hundreds of businesses as champions and advocates for refugees. Thanks to Concordia, We Hire Refugees, Amplio, the Tent Partnership for Refugees, and others for their collaboration. So I'm sure it's clear by now that the Refugee Advocacy Lab is powered by our partners. I'm grateful to all of you. We have 25 official partner organizations on our new website, refugeeadvocacylab.org, with more to come. I've learned so much from the people at RCUSA, Danny, Sarah, Scott, and Adam, and the RCUSA member organizations. A special thanks to Jen and Meredith at CWS and Stephanie, Basma, and Josh at We Are All America. You've taught me about movement generosity and how to bring together the power of grassroots organizing and policy advocacy. Huge gratitude to our funders, Wendy, Katie, Sarah, and Lucretia at OSF, and Adriana and Michael at Mountain Philanthropies. My heart is full because I get to work with Eric, Hardin, and all of the passionate people at Refugees International every day. You took a chance on me and sharpened my ideas and gave me space and support to build the lab. I also want to thank the RI board, including co-chairs Maureen White and Jeff Tyndall, for their stewardship and for their understanding of the importance of public engagement in these polarized times. The Refugee Advocacy Lab is powered by the most amazing team. Our communications consultants, Stephanie and Jen, as well as Nick, who built our website. A special shout out to Sarah, Anahita, and Aviva, who are the RI Comms mavens. You are simply the best, and you are an integral part of the lab team. Same to Yael, whose commitment and knowledge of US refugee policy are profound and impressive. Neely, Casey, and the Refugee Congress Network. The other day, someone captured our relationship by saying, "You and Neely are two sides of the same coin. Neely, I learn from your leadership, grace, and compassion every day." Our wise guides at IREP, Nisha and Sunil, and JC at IRC. Our energetic state coordinators, Rodrigue, Sylvia, Darlene, Victoria, and Olivia. Our state lead, Genevieve, who has incredible strategic focus and dedication and has taught me everything I know about state policy and advocacy. And the glue that holds us all together, Kaylee. You're amazing, and I deeply appreciate everything you do with such efficiency and good cheer. Last and most, thank you to the girl bosses who co-created the lab and were with me every step of the way, Nazanin, Becca, and Sarah. You are superwomen, and I'm so grateful for your vision, spunk, and leadership. Thanks to everyone here for indulging the closest I'll ever get to an Oscar speech, but I really wanted to share my gratitude to all the people who made today possible. It is now my honor to give the floor to our moderator, Lorena Gaboy, Board Chair of Refugee Congress. Lorena resettled in the US in 1992 after fleeing war in Liberia. She has worked extensively in the immigration and refugee resettlement space as a volunteer, intern, advocate, and leader. Lorena, thank you so much for moderating the discussion today, and over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Cindy. Refugee Congress is thrilled to be a Refugee Advocacy Lab partner and join a community of advocates that are committed to uplifting and amplifying refugee voices. Refugees serve in so many important roles in our communities as teachers, healthcare professionals, engineers, social workers, and other essential workers. We bring our skills and commitment to improving our new communities with us when we come to the US, and we work hard to fill important roles and help our neighbors. Unfortunately, there can be challenges in our efforts to do so. When I was working at Jewish Family Services of Delaware as a program coordinator for the Refugee Resettlement Program, I remember the frustrations that some of the newly arrived refugees had when they learned that they could not work in their fields because of state requirements that did not recognize their credentials in the US, and them having to start over, or having to go through a complicated and lengthy process, having their educational or work credentials evaluated. I specifically remember a young lady who was a charge nurse for 5 years in Pakistan, but she had to flee with her 5-year-old son and her brother. When they arrived at our office in Delaware, one of our welcoming community members assisted her through a long, arduous process of getting her nursing credentials evaluated. She finally passed the evaluation milestone after sending and requesting documents back and forth to Pakistan. She then had to take a nursing exam, and due to low English proficiency, she has not yet passed the exam, but she was able to complete a CNA program, pass that exam, and she currently works as a CNA at an assisted living facility. Today, I am honored to be joining you all to have a conversation with these amazing panelists about similar barriers that refugees face contributing their full potential, whether it be in the medical, teaching, and other fields, how effective policies can remove these barriers and generate benefits for refugees, their families, and longtime residents, and how storytelling and advocacy can be used to help achieve policy change. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to set the stage for how this conversation is going to be held today. I will start by asking each panelist 2 questions. Then there will be an audience Q&A. So you can definitely submit questions in the Zoom chat function at any point so that I can pose your questions to the panel after we've asked the set questions. And then also remember, this is a conversation. So we definitely encourage you to engage with us in the chat, the panelists as well, and also engage with each other. So now we're first going to be speaking with Lubab. So Lubab Al Qarashi is a pathologist assistant at She Paradigm in New Jersey and a refugee who resettled in the United States after fleeing violence in Iraq. Lubab holds a medical degree from the College of Medicine at Baghdad University and a specialization in surgical pathology. However, she has faced barriers to practicing medicine again in the US. After obtaining a temporary license to aid in the COVID pandemic response, she now leads a team that administers tests in New York nursing homes. So Lubab, I'm just going to start off with this question. You and other internationally trained professionals like yourself are amongst the healthcare workers in the US who are putting themselves at risk to fight the virus on the front lines of the pandemic. What made you choose to get so involved in the pandemic response?
Good afternoon, and thank you for considering me, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm so happy to see all of you without a mask. To answer your question, actually, there are a lot of reasons beyond this, but the main 2 reasons. Number 1, I am a doctor and I am under the oath. So I supposed to, and I must to provide help to anybody who is in need for that help in any part of this country, no matter what is the color, the religion, the nationality. And this is the life lesson that I learned during the pandemic, that we are all equal. And the second most important reason is that I'm trying to say thank you for this beautiful country that gave me a second opportunity to live in peace that we lost in our country of origin, Iraq. And having my kids, they are growing in front of my eyes in a healthy community. And this is really, really make me grateful to this country. So I'm just trying to say thank you. I was not waiting for a license. I was not expecting any reward for this. And I started fighting in the front lines against the pandemic, even before the executive order of the Governor Phil Murphy for the temporary license. So I'm so happy that now I'm trying to help, and I'm so happy that I'm doing my best to support our community that I'm part of it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and I definitely am grateful for several states such as New York and New Jersey who did allow those temporary licenses for individuals like yourself to be able to serve in this capacity. And you mentioned one thing that I really wanted to point out. You mentioned oath, and that is so important because not just you, but so many other refugee healthcare workers as well. As some of you may or may not know, there are an estimated 176,000 refugee healthcare workers in the US today. And I think just as yourself, they all took that oath, and they are wanting to just continue to do what they were, I guess you can say, born to do. So
exactly.
And then also, I mean, some US citizens feel that the barriers to medical licensure must be there for a good reason. Based on your many years of schooling in Iraq, what would you say to those people about your professional experience and qualifications?
Actually, this is a very good question. As I told you at the beginning, I was not like concerned about any license, but now I am really concerned because I found that me and any international medical physician have the right to ask for the permanent license. And I do ask for it and I apply for it, but has been denied. And I ask why it is denied. They mentioned two things: exams and regulations. So I wanted to understand what are these regulations. Actually, I searched a lot and I found that this regulation has been built since 1990. And it's like 30 years old, which is, I'm pretty sure it's not like working at this moment during the pandemic. After 30 years, these regulations are still not updated, not modified, not changed. And I realized that these regulations are built by people who are like international medical physicians who never took any exam. And that make me like asking a question. So what is the idea of these regulations? Is it the idea to like have to create or to offer to the community a well-trained doctors? Actually, I'm going to answer this question. I don't think the answer is going to be yes. The answer is going to be no. Because for me, for example, I'm a good example of an international medical physician. I finished 2 fellowship programs in the subspecialty in Baghdad, Iraq. And my supervisor was, and he is still, a American board certified, and now he's working in one of the main hospitals in New York. In addition to that, I practiced for more than 10 years. So what knowledge you are going to add to my knowledge? And working in addition to that in Baghdad, especially, like the life over there, every day we have a crisis. So my knowledge and my expertise has been tested to the extreme. I mean, pandemic, working with the pandemic, like in Iraq, is considered as a routinely day work. And in addition to that, I would like to mention that these exams are computer-based. So computer-based exam is not going to make a good doctor. Because simply, if I am going to work in a hospital or in a lab, I'm not going to deal with the computer. I'm going to deal with the human beings, right? So I have a suggestion. If you have a doctor well-trained with a subspecialty who finished fellowship programs, trained well, don't ask them to do an exams which are computer-based. And these exams, after I did this exam, I'm going to totally forget about it. It has nothing to do with the actual health process. So my suggestion is to take these people with the specialties and they are ready to take over, to enroll them in a fellowship program for 2 or 3 years under the supervision of a US licensed doctor, and let the US licensed doctor decide whether we are good to practice medicine or we should go back to the computer-based exam. This is like the message that I would like to pass over here. And I did like a Google search about how many doctors USA will need. So I realized that according to the Association of the Medical Colleges, American Medical Colleges, on 2032, the USA will be short on medical doctors in about 120,000 doctors, which is I feel really terrified because on 2032, I will not find a doctor for myself and for the family, right? Because this is a huge, huge number. So I think it's the time to change the regulations and to take the international medical physician seriously. I know that maybe I'm getting more time than I should do, but I just want to mention one thing. I have a friend of mine. She is a surgeon in congenital heart diseases. And she is like 15 years working in this field. She came to US as a refugee after what she suffered at Baghdad. And she ends up asking her to do exams. And she said, no, I'm not gonna do these exams simply because I'm gonna be away from my practice. I'm not gonna be updated. So she decided to go back home. I have a question. How many cardiac surgeons in congenital heart disease do we have throughout USA? It's a rare specialty. It's the time to think of us seriously since we proved ourselves during the COVID. And thank you again for the great, great opportunity and the time that you gave me today to represent myself and the international medical physician. Thank you.
Lubab, all things go to you. You really offered some amazing insights. I just want to thank you for giving us a background on these exams, their implications, and also offering such recommendations. You know, and at the end of the day, it's not all about money but of course, when refugees come here, you know, they have to take care of their families. And with such a specialty as being in the medical profession, believe it or not, there are 2 million college-educated immigrants and refugees in the US who are underemployed or unemployed. And specifically because some of these barriers as it relates to credentialing or evaluating or accepting what they have done in the past. I mean, you talked about so many years of experience that you've had, and you know, the fact that these barriers are in place, it really is a tough thing to look at. But once again, I just want to thank you for offering those insights. And so now we are going to be speaking to Dr. Sharif Nassar. Dr. Sharif Nassar is a licensed hematologist and the president, founder, and medical director of C. Paradigm Diagnostic Informatics Lab in New Jersey. Prior to founding C. Paradigm, he was the medical director of Quest Diagnostics and director of specialty and clinical laboratories at St. Joseph's Medical Center. Welcome, Dr. Nassar.
Thanks for the invitation, and hi to all your guests and participants.
Thank you. So you work with many internationally trained doctors like Lubab who are unable to fully practice in the US due to barriers to licensure. As someone who has practiced in the US for many years, can you speak to the importance of including foreign medical professionals in the US workforce?
Absolutely. I mean, we found this to be a very competitive strategy for us to compete in the market by doing what we call like downsourcing. So like senior pathologists sort of transfer and delegate their knowledge to junior pathologists who transfer and delegate their knowledge to pathologist assistants who in our setting are mostly international medical graduates. And we found that this greatly increases our efficiency and shortens our turnaround time. So right now we are a pathology laboratory, as you mentioned, and we specialize in the area of blood diseases and cancer. And we have 6 board certified hematopathologists and about 15. Every year we have about 15 international medical graduates that join us. They, for about 1 or 2 years while they are doing their exams to get into residency. Many of them, when they join us, they didn't have pathology in their mind, but when they get exposed to it, they like it. And they select pathology as the residency that they want to do. So it's actually a win-win. It takes about like 3 months to onboard them. I mean, you're starting with a group of very highly driven and smart and hardworking people. I mean, medical school graduates all over the world are the cream of the cream. So very short onboarding period, and then we appreciate very much the contributions that they are making to our operations, and they obviously are learning quite a big deal. And when they start their residency, they are good to go from day one.
I see. So from what you have seen so far in working with former refugees who are medical professionals such as Lubab, what are some examples of some of the key skill sets that these individuals bring with them when they resettle in our country, refugees, that is?
Two what I would call non-negotiable skill sets. Basically, they have to be driven to succeed, to survive first and succeed, and then they have to have a roadmap. You know, counterintuitively, you know, medicine, you don't have to be like a strategic thinker or particularly intelligent, you know, it helps, but mostly it's all about pattern recognition. So the more you see, the more you are experienced, and that's why, you know, physicians in general, the more experienced they are, the more like valuable they are. So they have to be highly driven, because particularly early on, they are facing lots of problems. You know, they have to study, they have to go through exams, you know, financial challenges. They have to work to you know, put food on the table. So they have to be quite driven to succeed, and then they have to have a roadmap. These are the two non-negotiable skills you need. So I get a kick from one of our, you know, pathologist assistants. He had it all like figured out in his mind. He said, I have to go through 3 phases. The phase of survival, you know, I have to learn English, I have to earn money to be able to put food on the table, and I have to go through my exams. And then the second phase is the phase of construction or building, and I have to find a residency, I have to resolve my you know, visa status, and I have to start a family. And then I was joking and I said, and in the third stage, it's going to be the stage of like, you know, success and plentifulness, because it kind of like in Arabic, it rhymed, you know, survival and then building and then ultimately success. So you absolutely have to have that roadmap. I see, unfortunately, too many really smart, hardworking, driven graduates that go on a tangent, and sometimes if they don't find the right opportunity, you know, they languish in like, you know, jobs like you know, Uber drivers and similar types of non-professional jobs, and they lose very valuable time. So it, you know, finding the setting that will support you and help you go the initial you know, difficult stage is really critical.
And you those are actually 2 great points: driven to succeed and having a roadmap. And as we all know, refugees are very, very resilient. From having to flee, that alone seems like a roadmap to me, right? Having to leave everything behind and go into a whole new country, fleeing whether it be violence or persecution. But then now they come here, and then of course, you know, they have to start over sometimes, right? They have to start over. But having the opportunity really brings about that drive to succeed, right? And that's what we're talking about today, that opportunity to be able to continue to practice, right? So based on your own experience in the medical field and the experiences of your internationally trained medical colleagues, what key reforms are needed to remove barriers to health licensure?
You know, I'm an old guy. I came here in 1981, and I went through the system. You know, I understand now that it's becoming, you know, more prolonged. The process is more prolonged, and obviously, you know, more expensive. So I think we need a program. We need two things basically. We need regulatory agencies to award temporary licensures that are restricted to the place of practice, what Dr. Lubab has mentioned. You know, allow them to like join a practice and be able to practice medicine as they are studying for their exam. So in our case, just to give you an example, you know, had they had their temporary license by the executive order to do specimen collection for COVID, for example, that was extremely helpful. You know, our governor in New Jersey, you know, was forthcoming with that, and that was quite helpful. The second thing, believe it or not, is we need an exchange sort of venue, like a matching program, like a clearinghouse. Believe it or not, we as employers are actually sometimes seeking to find you know, international medical graduates that would join us. In our situation, Lubab, through her social network, has been extremely successful and helpful in finding good candidates for us. But I suspect that there are quite a few international medical graduates that are actually having to pay to do like observership, which is a shame, particularly since there are so many healthcare facilities like us that sometimes, you know, are looking to find, you know, good candidates. So some type of a matching program that will sort of match the supply and the demand. I totally understand the system and the bureaucracy. I definitely echo what Lubab has said, that improvements need to be made. But as you all sort of expect, every profession has to regulate itself. You know, medical school graduates in the US have you know, went into great debt to finance their education. And I am, you know, every sort of profession has to kind of protect itself and ensure that practitioners are vetted, you know, in order to provide the highest, you know, medical services.
Thank you so much for sharing those amazing recommendations. I hope you all that are watching are taking notes on these amazing points that Dr. Nassar has mentioned. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Now I will be introducing Bertine Bahij. Bertine Bahij is a principal at Rawhide Elementary School in Gillette, Wyoming, and a refugee from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who resettled in the United States in 2003. Bertine holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics and education from the University of Wyoming and a master's degree in education in educational leadership from South Dakota State University. So Bertine, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I'm so sorry. We're having such a great conversation, but because of time, I'm just gonna ask for our responses to be slightly brief, but notwithstanding, please give us some great information. So this fall, teachers are facing an unprecedented challenge in having to teach virtually or balancing the risk of teaching in person and keeping students safe. Can you speak to how you and teachers at your school are facing these difficulties?
Yes, thank you, you know, for putting together this great opportunity to be able to share ideas in various fields. I would like to say thank you to the previous panelists, for sharing something that is really, dear to my heart, and those are possible, shortage that we're gonna be facing, and that's, in medical field, but that is also true in education. They are going, and they've been projected some, shortage in education as well, and having qualified teachers in the classrooms. So it's another area that I believe that refugees with those background and certification, we can find ways to create, pathways to be able to support that. Now, to go to your question, we are living in some undoubting time, and it has been an eye-opener as a leader of a school to put in place an environment that both students and teachers are going to be successful in. And in order to do that, we had to do a lot of lead work, and we had to rely a lot on, medical field experts to provide us information on what is the best way we can provide learning and instruction environment in the safest way under these circumstances. We did a lot of lead work before opening up the first day, and we put together a plan that was vetted by, medical experts, that was vetted by our teachers and families, and we were able to collect feedback to ensure that the plan that we're putting forth will be the best possible option for our families. But we also had to take into consideration that, as Dr. Lubab said, we are humans, and humans sometimes we are driven by emotions, and fear is there. Lack of knowledge sometimes around, what, surround this COVID is real, and some parents might opt out of sending the children to the brick and mortar. So we had to take that into consideration and have another pathway to still provide instruction and learning to all those students whose parents, opted to have them to learn remotely. So it was a unified effort, taking all the expertise around us to be able to create an effective plan. And it's a plan that it's evolving every single day. Every time that I walk in the building, there is something else you have to take into consideration that you probably did not have to think about. The size of the classroom does not provide the flexibility of being 6 feet away from each other. So what are those things that we have to consider within those constraints to still provide learning? Or we can add dividers in there, then the dividers create another hurdle. Kids cannot see the board. What are those? So it's a constant changing process, but the willingness to learn from each other and be able to collect that information and feedback with the underlying goal, which is providing that instruction and learning for our students. That has been the driving force for being able to go back in brick and mortar so far.
Thank you so much for providing those insights to us. And on a more personal level, you're a father. So what is that experience for you like at home right now?
Oh boy, I have two kids on my own. A 10-year-old young lady who's going on 16 in her mind, I believe, and a 6-year-old boy. And it has been an eye-opening for me because sometimes as professionals, our lenses often are a one-way street through those professional, mindset. And it's good to see the other side of it is what are the parents in these situations are experiencing. And having my kids coming home and being home for the, since March when we went under quarantine and learning online gave me another, appreciation about our educators. And it also gave me an idea on how can I use this experience to provide, something similar to those students that I will be servicing in our building, but also take into the consideration, of the lag of the education that took place, and how can I be strategic to provide support and intervention to make all those kids successful who might be like my son and might be fortunate to have parents who are also quarantined at the same time as him. But also we have those, essential workers like, medical doctors and, physicians and, anybody in those, environments that were deemed essentials, who did not have, those students don't have their parents right there to provide them that support. So it gave me a perspective to be able to understand that we have to bring those perspectives to the table as we're building up a plan that will work best for everybody involved this fall. And also be mindful that, we are not completely out of the wood yet. And, that's put another layer of understanding how can I be proactive as a building leader to prepare my teachers and my students should we have to go under quarantined or a full shutdown. So all those things have been things that I was able to experience with my child learning online, but also being able to tap into those experiences to be able to create a plan that, so far has been effective to provide support and learning for our students.
So keeping on that line, and I'm just going to ask you to be a little bit more brief about this last question that I'm going to ask. Do you feel like your past experience has made you more resilient and prepared to persist in the face of uncertainty that is posed by the COVID pandemic?
Absolutely. Just to connect back to what Dr. Lubab was saying, we coming from our home countries, we are fortunate and are blessed to be part of this new home that we, place we call home, the United States. And we are committed to provide our support and bring to the enrichment of this country. So that those experiences have provided me the leadership type that I have. I understand how can you learn in an environment where there is scarcity of resources, and how effective can I use the existing resources to impact students, problem solving abilities. Those are things that comes from the background that we all have experienced. And now that helps me to be able to look at a situation as a half full vase rather than half empty. And that perspective helped me to be able to problem solve and find various ways that I can still be able to be effective and allow my teacher to be effective and impactful to provide our student learning. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bertine. It was a pleasure hearing from you. And now we're going to move right on along to our final panelist, and that is Ms. Jackie Esposito. Jackie Esposito is a director of U.S. Policy and Advocacy at World Education Service, a nonprofit social enterprise dedicated to helping international students, immigrants, and refugees achieve their educational and workplace goals in the United States and Canada. Jackie has worked with nonprofit advocacy groups and philanthropic organizations in the US, Europe, and Canada, and has served on the boards and steering committees of national and local organizations serving immigrants and refugees. Welcome, Jackie. So great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Lorena.
Thank you. So the temporary executive orders put in states like New Jersey and Colorado that allowed temporary licensure of international medical professionals to aid in the pandemic response were encouraging first steps towards removing the barriers to licensure that many refugees resettled in the US face. What comes to mind in order to push this progress further?
Thank you so much, Lorena, and thank you to Refugees International and the Refugee Advocacy Lab for convening today's important discussion, and to Welcoming America for their leadership and bringing us all together this welcoming week. And special thanks to my fellow panelists for sharing both your experience and your perspective on these critical issues. I'm really honored to be able to join you all here today. So as you mentioned, Lorena, in the spring when COVID hit, governors, a handful of governors around the country used their emergency powers to allow eligible internationally licensed health workers to help in the response to COVID. But as Lubab mentioned, these executive orders were only temporary, and a change in the existing law is necessary in order to ensure that people have permanent licenses, people who are educated or experienced from outside the US. So when the governors began issuing the executive orders, the advocacy community very quickly recognized that there was, in this moment, a real opportunity to push for permanent reform. Many groups had been working on licensing reform in all sectors, healthcare, teaching, engineering, others, for years. And when COVID hit, for the first time, we saw really unprecedented interest among media, among policymakers, in trying to integrate internationally trained healthcare workers into the health workforce in a very rapid manner. We know that there are very severe shortages for healthcare workers in parts of the US, and as Lubab mentioned, they're only set to get worse. But when COVID hit, it became urgent. And we saw a real recognition from governors about how broken the system is, because at this time, they were rapidly working to get internationally trained health workers into their workforces. So to your question, what comes next? So the group of advocates that have really joined together these past 6 or so months to drive permanent reform are now strategizing and working together in various states to campaign for permanent reform for internationally trained doctors and other health workers. Where it's a state issue, it's a state-by-state strategy. And I think it's a two-prong approach. One is, we've been advocating with governors to recognize the immense contributions that the doctors who were licensed under the temporary executive orders have contributed to our country. So I think that's one piece of it, is we have to keep pushing for recognition of the work that's been done in this moment. And then in addition to that, for the states that have issued executive orders and for other states that haven't, we are laying the groundwork to try to change those laws that Lubab mentioned and Dr. Nassar mentioned, right? The redoing of residencies, the enormous expense that people have to pay, and of course, taking the exams all over again when you've been working for 20 years and you're in a specialty outside the US. These are some of the barriers that we're working to try to remove in the states. And are advocating with governors and state legislatures to try to reform these laws so that we can get permanent change.
Thank you. So in line of having these or recognizing these doctors and their contributions to our country during this time, how can you speak to the importance of storytelling as an advocacy tool in the effort to reform professional licensure? And if you can please keep it just a little bit brief for us and so we can transition.
Absolutely. And feel free to stop me. So one of the first steps to achieving policy change is raising public awareness. And one of the most effective ways, if not the most effective ways to do that, is through storytelling. Especially today in such a polarized climate, stories are powerful tools in changing hearts and minds and raising awareness about issues. So the personal accounts that we hear of people who are directly impacted by policies, they not only shine a light on the broken policies, but they also provide a vehicle for people to shape those policies. The people who have the experience and know what the barriers are, by sharing their stories, they can impact that policy change. I've already learned so much from Lubab. From the doing webinars together and hearing Lubab explain her experience and the barriers she's faced, that has absolutely influenced how I approach my work with trying to change policy. And I think as advocates, it's critically important that we continue to not only identify opportunities for storytelling, but that we as advocates are learning from the personal experiences of people who are living through living through this on a daily basis. And then just the last thing I'll say is, I think storytelling, it helps to create an emotional response. And so that's another reason it's so important for advocacy, because you can really help to make people feel empathy, and maybe they see themselves in hearing someone else's story, right? Maybe they had obstacles that they had to overcome. So storytelling can just be so powerful as we're trying to raise public awareness and trying to shape hearts and minds.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So now we're going to turn to the audience for questions at this time. And it looks like one of the first questions we have, I'll start with you, Jackie, on this question. So disabled refugees are facing a lot of difficulties because of their refugee status and the disability, regardless whether they are highly trained or not. What could be done to mitigate these challenges?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think if I'm understanding right, the question is really like, there's occupational and professional licensing as one policy barrier that we talked about today, but we know that there's many barriers to economic integration for refugees and for immigrant community members at all skill levels, right? So some of the other work that we do, which is really part of our advocacy, with respect to occupational licensing too, and that is we need to have better workforce development training, adult education services available to everybody in the United States who needs them. We need greater federal investment. We need greater investment from states and localities in workforce development training and adult ed. And we need to make sure that immigrants and refugees are getting meaningful access and equitable access to these programs, that they're tailored to the needs of people. As Lubab mentioned, for example, with occupational licensing, we know that, these laws haven't been changed in decades. Similarly, I think with workforce development programs and adult education programs, we need real innovation, right, to meet the moment that we're in. So I think it's about funding, and I think it's about programming.
Absolutely, I totally. Would anyone else like to, any of our other panelists, would you like to add any recommendations to what Jackie has just shared with us?
I would like to jump in there and just, I completely echoed what Jackie is mentioning. I think we also need a structure in place where it's easy to access that information. I was listening to Lubab, and she was mentioning that she had to do this, strenuous work to even finding the information. What is the pathway that I need to be able to get licensure, regardless of what is your background? So I think having a structure that is in place that can provide that information, once that pathway has been established, I think can greatly help our refugee counterparts to be able to successfully navigate that process.
Yeah, medicine is one of the advantages of medicine is that it's very varied, and so it accommodates people who are physically challenged in one way or the other, whether linguistically or physically. Pathology, actually, this is a shout out for me for pathology, is really a great example of that, and it does accommodate people with different physical challenges.
I would like to add something. During the pandemic, I realized that a lot of life lessons that we learned. First of all, the most important lesson that we should forget about our differences, because we are fighting together. This is very important. And the other thing that I noticed that, and I advise actually, to keep the health sector and the educations away from business. These two most important sectors, they should stay away from the business. I realized that yesterday I was talking to a teacher, and she's a friend of mine, and I was asking her how much you are paid, and she mentioned a number, and I was really shocked. This is very, very dangerous. I mean, those people are spending their lives, their whole day trying to build a new leaders and they are paid very minimum. This is like, I was surprised really. So I advise that keeping the health sector and the education away from business is a must. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those recommendations. And once again, I hope that all of those who are watching are taking notes and willing to definitely follow up on some of these points. Now, I'm just gonna pose one more quick question, and just if one more person can just give me a brief response. I'm following up from what Jackie mentioned about storytelling and its importance. Can someone else just chime in about storytelling and its importance to this work that we're all trying to do in terms of creating awareness?
This is Bertine. I think storytelling, and Jackie, I wish I had the English that you had to put it so beautifully, saying, but the power of storytelling is making that emotional connection. I think often than not, being a refugee becomes an identity that is associated with all of us who have experienced some sort of, background, trauma. And that is an identity that I don't, it's part of who I am, but sometimes it's hard for sharing what you have become, from that foundation. And by sharing that opportunity, people get to learn and understand, the contribution and what you bring to the table, that there is more to the trauma and sadness and that experience, but the resiliency part to it. But also, what are those successful stories that are taking place, and how thankful we are to be provided that opportunity. I think it's something that is truly needed, and that's how policies are impacted in a positive way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that last comment there, Bertine. So our time together has come to an end, but the work that we each have to do is just beginning. I want to thank each and every one of our panelists for providing us with such great insights on what things look like on the ground for refugees and their contributions to the communities that have welcomed them, as we all collectively fight COVID within different sectors. And I want to thank you all for joining us today to share in on this conversation. As a reminder, please visit the Refugee Advocacy Lab's website at www.refugeeadvocacylab.org and sign up for the lab's email list. If there were any questions that we were not able to answer today from the audience, I want you to please send an email to Anahita, that's ANAHITA, at refugeesinternational.org. She'll follow up with answers. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you all have a great rest of the week. Thank you.